All women were brutalized, violated, and strangled to death.
This is a serial killer. He's leaving a signature on how he commits these homicides.
In a violent city where many murders went unsolved, the deaths were not immediately linked.
They were dead-end cases. They had no suspects, they had no leads.
10 years later, cold case detectives reran the DNA evidence, and they got a hit.
Then the computer made the link and notified Bridgeport PD that there is a hit, and it belongs to this guy down in Georgia.
Drifter Emanuel Webb used his charisma to conceal dark and destructive desires.
Webb is the smiling face of evil. Always warm, never threatening, and yet something utterly horrifying is going on behind that facade.
He wanted to kill. He had opportunities to kill, and he didn't miss one of them.
Although his crimes went unpunished for years, a dedicated task force would eventually unmask Emanuel Webb as one of the world's most evil killers. In 2006, 40-year-old drifter Emanuel Webb thought he'd committed the perfect murders.
These serial offenders, the narcissism, they think they're smarter than everybody else, and each murder they get away with proves it to them. They begin to think they're infallible.
In the 1990s, forensic science was limited, but it was only a matter of time before it caught up with Webb.
DNA wasn't refined, so you had this sample that was saved with the hopes of, at some point, technology would catch up, and it did.
18 years after Webb killed his first victim, the man the papers called the East End Killer would face justice for what he'd done.
He'll never get out. You know, I mean, that's a death sentence for him.
This killer's story begins on the 9th of April 1966 in Vidalia, Georgia.
Emanuel Webb's father, who was a disabled veteran, died when he was about 3 years old, and he lived with his mother.
Webb grew up with his mother and older sister in Mount Vernon. In 1984, Webb graduated from high school, and he and his sister traveled north.
He left Georgia to go and live with his sister in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
He worked as a security guard in Fairfield, which is an adjacent town to Bridgeport. Lived on the east side. The east end of Bridgeport was, I would call a working class area of the city. People who'd lived there all their lives.
Emanuel Webb was a hard-working man on the surface, with quite a charismatic manner, very attractive to women. He meets a girl called JD.
He met her when she was kind of lost, and he inserted himself into that situation and ingratiated himself, and they started a relationship.
In 1988, he and 22-year-old JD had a baby. But by this time, Webb had developed a serious drug habit.
There was a second child that came along. He was a problematic father. He didn't pay any attention really to his partner or his children. He was going on binges, he'd go missing for days.
Emanuel Webb's behavior was not unusual in 1990s Bridgeport. It was a city in sharp decline.
In the 1990s, Bridgeport was suffering a crack cocaine epidemic, and all that that brings with organized crime and gangs and the addiction and the need to get the money to pay for that addiction and the poverty that was around. That's going to have a massive impact.
It was also just a very violent city. We had high murder rates back then. in our cities, mostly from either gang activity or drug activity.
In Bridgeport from 1990 to 1993, there were 287 homicides.
Most of the murders could be linked to gangs or drugs, but there were a handful which did not fit into this pattern.
In April 1990, the fire brigade were called to a car fire in the East End.
And I was one of the first patrol officers that responded. Once the car fire was extinguished, there was a body that was found there.
The body belonged to 39-year-old Sharon Cunningham.
She was found in the car with terrible burns to her face and to her body. She was partially clothed. She was nude from the waist down.
But this was no tragic accident.
She had been ligature strangled with her pantyhose, and then there was also secondary injuries, beating, blunt force trauma to the head.
There was no doubt that the death was an unnatural one.
It was mysterious as to why the car had been burned and how she ended up where she ended up.
Sharon did not drive herself there, did not undress herself. There was an attacker who planned this and who took every step of the way to try and wipe out the evidence of their crime.
Detectives suspected that Sharon had been sexually assaulted.
There was DNA found vaginally.
They found spermatozoa in her, and that was saved and preserved.
The evidence was bagged and recorded, but the investigators had no idea who Sharon's killer was.
A lot of the background work that was done at the time knew where she worked, knew who she frequented, but there was really no suspect.
Two years later, on the 28th of March 1992, police were called to another suspected homicide, just a few blocks from where Sharon's body had been found.
A 29-year-old woman called Minnie Sutton is found dead in her apartment.
Family lady, worked, people knew her, would go to the clubs every once in a while.
She has been brutally attacked. Her 3-year-old son is also found in the apartment, but he, thankfully, is unharmed.
What they discover is Minnie partially clothed, with her lower torso naked and no underwear on. She also has suffered stab wounds to her neck, to her torso, and to her stomach area.
A post-mortem revealed crack cocaine to be present in Minnie's system.
The cause of death was multiple stab wounds combined with strangulation. This is a person who died being choked to death while bleeding to death. This is not an attack that could have been survived by anyone.
Interviews with Minnie's family and friends quickly led police to a suspect.
Her boyfriend's brother had assaulted Minnie a couple of weeks before, and 2 days before the homicide, she'd woken up and he was kind of threatening her with a knife. This is the complex issue of dealing with these homicide cases. You can develop good-looking suspects right off the go, only to wash them out, down the line. And that's what occurred here. They were able to rule him out.
The only lead police had was evidence recovered from the crime scene.
The police investigators discovered 2 smoked cigarette butts near the body of Minnie, and they collect them and they preserve them.
In the early 1990s, DNA profiling in criminal investigations was relatively new.
DNA technology, as far as getting evidence processed and identifying a suspect, isn't as refined as it is now.
Another murder case went cold. A year later, in April 1993, again in the East End of Bridgeport, the body of Elizabeth Gandy was discovered.
Elizabeth was last seen April 16th, and then her body was found on the 19th. It was in an abandoned building that was kind of a crack house.
When her body was found, she was badly beaten.
Elizabeth's body is found with her breast exposed. This is suggestive of a sexual element to the case.
Elizabeth was a 34-year-old mother of two who'd looked forward to welcoming her first grandchild into the world.
One of her daughters, when the attack took place, was in hospital about to give birth to a son, but Elizabeth Gandy never got to see her grandson.
The cause of death is determined as blunt force injuries and strangulation. She is killed being hit and also being choked to death.
The crime scene was a bloody one, and there were clear signs that a struggle had taken place.
There's blood spatter on the walls, up to about 6 foot.
Unfortunately, that building was an abandoned building, so a lot of contamination, a lot of people's DNAs could potentially be present.
There was blood and tissue under her fingernails that was preserved, again, in hopes of DNA analysis would catch up and allow that analysis to come with a match.
Witnesses were interviewed, evidence bagged, but no link was made between the murders and no suspects identified. No one knew that a violent sexual predator was targeting the women of Bridgeport. In June 1993, just 10 weeks after Elizabeth Gandy's death, Bridgeport PD were called to the home of another young woman in the city's East End.
Sheila Etheridge, once again, person that had her own home, worked, social life, family.
She's been missing for a few days.
She'd had a birthday celebration on June 25th. The last known contact with her was a telephone call on the morning of June 26th. Her body was found a couple of days later in her apartment.
Her father and a friend break into Sheila's apartment by climbing through a window, only to discover, tragically, Sheila's body already decomposed.
There are signs of strangulation, including hemorrhages, bruising in the neck. But the decomposition took away the degree of confidence required to definitively call the manner of death a homicide.
A search of the property found evidence that 29-year-old Sheila had not been alone.
There was a beer can found in the house.
A used condom that appeared to contain semen was discovered.
Police inquiries revealed Sheila to be a recreational drug user. They also learned she had a boyfriend.
She was in a relationship with somebody. Nobody really knew his name. They kind of was speculating who it was.
One of the names in the mix was local man Emanuel Webb. Police quickly ruled him out of their inquiries.
They talk to him, but he is plausible, amenable, helpful, and charming.
By August 1993, 27-year-old Webb's relationship with his partner JD was over, and he'd returned to his home state of Georgia. He was living the life of a single man.
He was very attractive to women. I think several of the women who knew him said how extraordinarily attractive and charming he was.
By the summer of 1994, Webb was dating 37-year-old Evelyn Charity. On the 10th of July, Evelyn's colleagues were concerned when she failed to turn up for work.
A friend checked on her and found the body in the victim's apartment on her bed.
She's laying in bed on her side. There's a stab wound to the neck and there's evidence of strangulation.
She was dressed in a nightgown and like a house coat, no underwear on, and the house coat and nightgown were pushed up, exposing the vaginal area.
Evelyn had been sexually assaulted and murdered. When police attended, they found a chaotic crime scene.
The scene is crawling with neighbors and friends who are there, so potential DNA and evidence could have been cross-contaminated. They had to quickly isolate the relevant from the irrelevant and protect the important from the unimportant.
The killer had stolen Evelyn's car and a gun. When they began looking into her lifestyle and associates, Emanuel Webb's name quickly came up as someone Evelyn may have been romantically involved with.
The police track down Evelyn's car and they trace it to Emanuel Webb. When Webb is confronted with the fact that he has Evelyn Charity's car and that she's been found dead, he does something quite astonishing.
He tried to talk his way out of it with, well, yeah, I was there and I had sex with her, but it was consensual. She died accidentally, and then I tried to stage it to look like a homicide and robbery.
The explanation did not match up with the evidence from Evelyn's autopsy. Bones in Evelyn's neck were broken, and she'd been stabbed.
There are many accidental deaths that happen during sex, but you don't break your own hyoid bone by participating in wild sex, and you certainly don't bleed to death through a stab wound.
Facing a murder charge, Webb's legal team offered a plea bargain, which prosecutors accepted.
Webb was allowed to plead involuntary manslaughter. That's not an uncommon thing to plea deal, and it does save the cost of a trial, and it also saves all the uncertainty around whether you're going to get a conviction or not.
In 1995, he's given 20 years. As a result of his conviction in Georgia, Webb's DNA is taken for the first time.
At the time, there was not a national register, but Emanuel Webb's DNA was stored on the database of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. In late 2001, after serving 6 years of his sentence, Webb was paroled. The 35-year-old was free, and he was on the move once again.
Emanuel Webb is out of jail. In fact, he's not only out of jail in Georgia, he's gone back to Connecticut.
In the mid-1990s, Bridgeport's police commander set up a homicide task force to look at dozens of unsolved murders from earlier in the decade.
They were charged with probably looking at 207 open cases. And the cases were defined by evidence that was collected that hadn't been analyzed.
They started to do a linkage analysis on the cases. Are these cases related?
There were 4 unsolved murders where the female victim had been strangled. All had taken place within the same square mile. The cold case team wondered if they were looking at the work of a serial killer.
It is very often the case with serial offenders, and especially with serial killers, that they operate in what you might call a comfort zone. If you're going to kill somebody, you don't necessarily want to do it in a place you've never been to before.
So in this case, obviously they were all in Bridgeport, but more importantly, they were all on the east side, all within really almost blocks of one another to a large degree. So they're isolated sort of geographically.
It was an area that was seeing an increase in drug-related activity, gang-related activity, homicides.
Though detectives suspected a so-called East End killer was responsible for a cluster of women's murders, the investigation in the mid-1990s quickly hit a dead end.
The cases were going nowhere. They had no suspects. They had no leads.
In 2000, cold case detectives began taking a fresh look at the evidence.
There was a lot of forensic evidence at these crime scenes. The kind of forensic evidence that now a criminal would avoid leaving. So we had things like cigarette butts and nail scrapings and semen.
There was evidence that was collected that was never sent up to the lab because there was really nothing you could do with it. Some of the DNA is difficult to extract. They sat in evidence for almost 10 years until technology caught up.
The cold case detectives, they collect this evidence and they send it for DNA profiling.
It was a slow process, but when they finally tested in 2005, the State Forensic Lab's findings were worth the wait. Evidence collected from 4 of the East End crime scenes held forensic traces that came from just one person's DNA profile.
So the likelihood of it being the same killer is considerable. The police in Connecticut have all the DNA. All they're missing is the killer.
The profile was run through the US National Database, which since 1998 had contained the DNA profile of many newly convicted serious offenders.
They put the DNA into the CODIS system, into the database, which was obviously a very good thing to do, but nothing. There were no hits at all.
It was a frustrating turn of events. Bridgeport detectives had unearthed a serial killer, but they had no idea who he was or how to find him. In early 2006, the Bridgeport PD cold case unit investigating the suspected East End serial killer finally struck gold.
They get a DNA match.
There was a hit, and it dealt with a death in Vidalia, Georgia, and identified an offender, and that DNA from the homicide in Georgia matched the unknown DNA profiles on the cases in Bridgeport.
The offender had been jailed for the manslaughter of 37-year-old Evelyn Charity in Vidalia in July 1994. 39-year-old Emanuel Webb. In late 2005, Webb had once again been on the wrong side of the law in his home state of Georgia.
And in November that year, he's arrested on drug possession and also parole violation because he's left the state in which he was supposed to be serving his parole. And so the police arrest him.
Investigators in Georgia took a DNA sample from Webb, which now revealed him to be the #1 suspect for the East End murders in Connecticut.
So now we have a DNA hit, and then we have a suspect that's incarcerated for a similar type of crime.
Hearing the details of Evelyn Charity's death, Bridgeport detectives realized they were looking at a near identical homicide to the ones they were investigating.
It had both behavioral and forensic linkages.
There was too much of a commonality there.
Bridgeport detectives visited Webb to verify his DNA link to their cases.
So then they had to get a warrant together to get a confirmatory DNA sample. They swab them, get it, and once that came back as positive identification of him, then the case moves forward.
With Emanuel Webb safely locked up for the time being for his parole violation in Georgia, Bridgeport detectives had time to learn everything they could about their suspect.
Who the hell is this guy, and could he have killed these women? And it didn't take long to realize he literally had lived in Bridgeport the whole time that this happened.
He had ties to Georgia, had family in Connecticut. He was transient, he would go back to Georgia, come back.
He lived in Bridgeport on the east side, many times within blocks of where these homicides occurred. All these women lived on the east side of Bridgeport. They all knew one another. They all were using crack.
By charting Webb's network of friends, the places he frequented, and the lifestyle he lived, investigators were able to establish a strong likelihood he knew all of the victims.
When our officers and detectives went out there to do the canvassing and get background information, everybody knew who he was.
There were witnesses who'd seen Webb socializing with some of his victims.
There was a street there called Stratford Avenue, which had a number of clubs on it and bars. People used to go in there. So they saw him. They knew who he was. Hey, you know what? We saw him with some of these females.
Though the DNA evidence was compelling, prosecutors feared it would not be enough to secure a conviction.
In order to actually produce a viable case in the courtroom, you need much more.
They reached out to the FBI, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation has a behavior analysis unit. It's called BAU.
FBI agent Greg McCrary was assigned to the case.
I was contacted by the state attorney in Connecticut about taking a look at a series of cases that they believed were linked. How could his DNA be at every crime scene and him not be involved?
Agent McCrary was asked if he could identify features of the murders that linked them to one killer. He looked at what he called backcloth.
Backcloth is the overall context in which the cases occur. We're talking about geography, we're talking about victimology, and by that we're talking about socioeconomic issues, commonalities among the victims as well. When we looked at the method and manner of death, strangulation was involved.
Strangulation is a relatively unusual method of homicide.
I did a statistical analysis. In the homicides in Bridgeport from 1990 to 1993, there were 287 homicides. Of those, 7 involved strangulation. 3 of those dealt with male victims, so now we're down to 4 females that were killed by strangulation. One of those cases was solved.
The 4 victims were Sharon Cunningham, Minnie Sutton, Elizabeth Gandy, and Sheila Etheridge.
Strangulation is a very close and up personal way to kill somebody. When men kill each other, they rarely strangle each other. When men kill women, it's a bit more common that they will use strangulation.
Another pattern McCrary identified was that each of the women had suffered additional violence.
There were other injuries inflicted on the victims that were unnecessary to cause death. We had these secondary injuries, in many cases, that involve blunt force trauma to the head or knife wounds and incise wounds and lacerations.
Minnesota was the one that was really mutilated. There were stab wounds there, not fatal stab wounds, but slashings.
She was stabbed in the neck, the left-hand side, the forehead.
From a behavioral aspect, looking at what an offender does that he doesn't have to do is very compelling because it goes to that individual perpetrator and no one else.
Another hallmark of the killer was that each victim had likely been sexually assaulted.
The clothes of the victims had been moved to expose sexual parts of their bodies. So that's quite an obvious sign to us that there's a sexual motivation here.
Semen was recovered from the body of Elizabeth and from a condom near to Sheila. 11 years later, DNA from that condom helped link Emanuel Webb definitively to the scene.
And that is a key piece of evidence that was identified, collected, properly documented, stored, and eventually it was analyzed. And that gave us DNA material of the person who used that condom. It was a magnificent piece of police work.
Along with the physical links and commonalities between the crime scenes, detectives discovered Webb's behavioral patterns were a fit for the crimes.
The one thing there that we did learn from individuals that had relationships with him, he was rough, right? It was domestic violence, but it was sexual in nature. It was a pattern of behavior that for him, that was his gratification. You know, it was sexual force, dominance, and violence.
This knowledge suggested a possible motivation for the murders.
He either covered up his sexual acts by trying to kill them, or he knew he was going to kill them and he wanted to have sex with them anyway.
Having found links between the deaths in Bridgeport, prosecutors next needed to link them with the one Webb had already been convicted of: the manslaughter in Vidalia of Evelyn Charity.
The victim in Georgia died of ligature strangulation, and there was cocaine in that victim, and these other victims had cocaine in their system as well. They were known to be doing crack cocaine. And there was injuries secondary to the strangulation that were unnecessary in the Georgia case and the other ones.
The forensics and the profiling made for a strong case, but leaving no stone unturned, the team revisited the files to do some old-fashioned detective work.
In cold case homicides, you're always looking for new evidence.
It's one thing to make an arrest, but then to get a conviction, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, you want to make sure that you've got all the information here. These detectives were phenomenal detectives. They were very, very self-motivated. They looked at it, and they had to go back. You're talking going back 10 years. And, you know, finding witnesses, going back, talking to family members.
Among those investigators tracked down were people who'd known 29-year-old Sheila Etheridge, who'd been found murdered in June 1993. They finally confirmed that her mystery boyfriend was none other than Emanuel Webb.
When they started doing their background work, you know, two-edged sword here, right? Hey, yes, he was in a relationship where it kind of got fleshed out. The family said, hey, they knew it was a rough relationship, it was sexual in nature, and then he was abusive towards her.
Investigators revisited the file of Elizabeth Gandy, whose body had been found in an abandoned building. The walls were spattered with blood, not all of which was hers, suggesting her attacker may have been injured himself.
The other lead that we suggest in those cases is going to the local emergency rooms or primary care centers and ask if anyone has come in with a laceration wound to be stitched up or fixed up.
Detectives dug deep to find out whether Webb had attended a medical facility around the time of Elizabeth's murder.
Remarkably, it was discovered that Webb had gone to hospital the following day.
He was being treated at Bridgeport Hospital for cuts, scrapes, abrasions that were indicative of a struggle.
And that turned out to be his blood at the crime scene, on the victim's clothing and on the wall. So when you begin to put all of this together, I thought it made a very compelling case.
In June 2006, Emanuel Webb, already incarcerated in Georgia, was charged by Bridgeport police officers with the April 1993 murder of Elizabeth Gandy. Convinced he was responsible for 3 more deaths, prosecutors prepared their case, but Webb was not going down without a fight. On the 14th of February 2007, 40-year-old Emanuel Webb was extradited to Connecticut from Georgia. He arrived with his ankles and wrists in shackles.
They were able to get 4 warrants for his arrest for 4 of the homicides, and he came up to Bridgeport to stand trial while he was still incarcerated in Georgia.
As Webb waited in a Connecticut prison for his trial to begin, there was months of legal wrangling over how the 4 murders would be tried.
The prosecution wanted to basically have one trial for all 4 cases.
Agent Greg McCrary's analysis connecting the crime scenes was central to their argument.
Early April 2008, I was contacted by the prosecutor in Bridgeport. They wanted to try these cases together, and they asked if I would be willing to render an opinion.
The aim was to show that the 4 murders had enough in common to be tried in a single court case.
They're tying it together, showing the signature events and why there's a commonality there, and it's not a coincidence, and it has to be from the same individual.
The only people believing they shouldn't be tried together was Webb and his defense attorneys.
They wanted each case to be done individually because there was different evidence. And they also felt that if you did them all at once, it would be easier for a jury to just convict them on all of them.
I ended up testifying on May 1st in a hearing before a judge in Connecticut on the cases. And I was linking actually the Georgia case with 4 cases in Bridgeport. At the end of the day, the judge excluded one of the Bridgeport cases.
Webb would not be tried for the June 1993 murder of Sheila Etheridge.
Sheila exhibited enough decomposition to render the pathologist unable to determine the cause and manner of death with scientific precision and accuracy. So although we found hemorrhages to her left eye, although we found bruising to her neck, we couldn't really determine that this was due to a homicide.
Webb's DNA was at the crime scene, on the beer can and in the condom, but neither could be deemed incriminating.
He was in a relationship with her, so it wouldn't be unusual to find a beer can empty there. They couldn't really tie him there as closely and as tightly as they did the other 3 cases.
The judge erred on the side, I guess, of caution and took that one out, but kept the other 3 in, which was still a win.
It was a devastating blow for Sheila Etheridge's loved ones. 42-year-old Emanuel Webb would be tried for the murders of Minnie Sutton, Sharon Cunningham, and Elizabeth Gandy. But at the last minute, as detectives and prosecutors finessed their arguments ready for trial, Emanuel Webb changed his plea.
They were ready to go to trial, but Webb pled out. He didn't want to go to trial because the evidence then was overwhelming.
On the 22nd of May 2008, Emanuel Webb cuts a plea deal with the Connecticut authorities.
Webb pled no contest to the 3 murders. A month later, he was sentenced. The state had not proven the aggravating factors, such as rape or kidnap, needed to make the murders death penalty cases.
He was sentenced to 60 years in prison, 20 to life on each of the 3 cases, as I understand it, to run consecutively, one after the other.
So basically it's a life sentence.
First, however, he would return to Georgia to serve out his time for the parole violation there. His sentence at Hancock State Prison ended in July 2014.
As of then, he was turned over to Connecticut Corrections to serve the 3 sentences for those homicides.
When Webb's sentence was handed down in a Bridgeport court on the 25th of June 2008, there was applause from his victims' loved ones. It had taken 18 years to get them justice, and the dedication of a committed team of detectives.
It was tireless work, you know, and for me, as a supervisor, as a commander of that unit, you know, you no more pride than to have distinguished detectives do what they did and bring these cases to a successful culmination.
Webb was a dangerous predator who hid in plain sight.
Emanuel Webb was a man who was actually the devil, hiding around the corner or in the coffee shop, and you never suspected him. He remains, for me, literally one of the most dangerous killers in America, because he's shown no remorse, no reticence, no regret, no conscience. That makes him a very evil man indeed.
It took many years to bring Webb to justice, but for those involved, it was worth the wait.
I've had cases that have taken over 20 years to solve, but it doesn't matter. I mean, as long as you can solve the case, it's the perseverance. It's getting justice for the victims and holding people accountable for their behavior.
You'd always get calls from family members, you know, on the anniversary dates of the homicide or their birthdays. It's not going to change anything, but you're bringing them a little bit of closure, and they get justice. You know, that's what you try to do. You try to bring justice to the family and to the victim themselves.
It began with rain, not the gentle kind that washes over rooftops and disappears into gutters, but the kind that feels deliberate, sharp cold, intrusive. On the night of March 3rd, 1984, the town of Millstone, Pennsylvania was buried under a storm so violent that even the crickets went silent. At 10:47 p.m., a power line snapped near the edge of town, plunging the neighborhood into darkness. Within minutes, someone screamed. By the time the police arrived, a young woman was gone. Her name was Emily Carter, 23 years old, last seen locking up the diner where she worked. Her car was still there, her purse on the counter, and the keyring she always kept clipped to her belt loop lay on the floor, one key missing. The storm drowned out everything: her footsteps, her voice, and whatever sound came next. Detective Frank Daly arrived just after midnight. He was tired, soaked through a cigarette half burned between his fingers. The rain made his trench coat shine under the streetlights that still worked. He'd seen plenty of crimes in his 20 years, but something about this one felt different. Too clean, too quick. The footprints outside the diner led nowhere. The mud was washed away. The one street camera nearby had been offline for weeks. All they had was an empty parking lot and a missing girl. For the next 72 hours, Millstone became a town that didn't sleep. Flyers printed overnight neighbors out with flashlights. The riverbanks searched again and again. But Emily had vanished into the rain like she was never there. 3 days later, a boy walking his dog found something in the woods behind Ridgefield Road, a single shoe, pale blue, size 6. Emily's mother confirmed it was hers. The police scoured the area. They found signs of a struggle, a torn piece of fabric, and a trail of broken branches that ended near the old train tracks. But there was no body, no witness, no clear direction. The case went cold before it even warmed up. Months passed. The flyers faded. The family's porch light stayed on every night for a year. Detective Daly filed the case as unsolved abduction, presumed homicide, but he never stopped thinking about it. He kept Emily's photo pinned above his desk long after others told him to move on. When he retired in 1999, he left that photo behind, not because he forgot, but because he couldn't stand to take it home. Years turned into decades. The town changed. The diner was sold, repainted, renamed. People stopped talking about Emily. Only her mother, Margaret Carter, refused to let go. Every anniversary, she'd visit the woods where her daughter's shoe was found, bringing wildflowers tied with a blue ribbon. "You'll come home someday," she'd whisper. Her voice trembled, but her faith didn't. Then came the second storm. It wasn't rain this time, it was progress. In 2021, a new forensic unit reopened cold cases across the state, armed with DNA technology that hadn't existed when Emily disappeared. They digitized every file, every fingerprint, every scrap of evidence forgotten in basement archives. Among the boxes was a sealed plastic bag labeled Exhibit B14, containing the torn fabric from the woods. Inside that fabric, under microscopic inspection, was a faint trace of skin, a single cell that had survived almost 40 years. Technician Laura Vega was the one who found it. She'd been on the job less than a year, assigned to review decades-old evidence most people considered hopeless. But when she saw that cell, she froze. It was barely visible, a ghost of a fingerprint embedded in the weave of the cloth. She ran the scan through the national database. No match. She tried the regional archives. Nothing. Then she cross-checked it with familial DNA, a new tool in the forensic arsenal, comparing unknown samples against genetic data voluntarily submitted by citizens to genealogy sites. This time, the system blinked. A partial match appeared. The name Daniel Hargrove, a retired mechanic, 72 years old, living just 20 miles away from Millstone. He'd never been arrested, never even questioned in connection with Emily's disappearance. His record was spotless, but the system showed that his DNA was a familial match close enough to suggest the real suspect might be a relative. Laura leaned back in her chair, staring at the monitor. A spark had just ignited a fire that had slept for generations. Detectives reopened the file officially in June 2022. They called it Operation Rainfall, a nod to the night everything began. They traced the Hargrove family line, 2 sons, 1 deceased, 1 alive. The living son, Mark Hargrove, had a record minor thefts, trespassing a bar fight, that left a man hospitalized in 1985. He'd left Millstone right after Emily vanished. For years, he'd drifted across states, Ohio, Kentucky, Missouri, changing jobs, addresses, and stories. When the police finally located him, he was living alone in a rundown trailer outside Jefferson City, Missouri. Detective Hannah Price, the lead investigator on the reopened case, flew there with a warrant. She'd studied the old files, memorized the photos, and knew the sound of Emily's mother's voice by heart from old interview tapes. When she knocked on Mark's door, the man who opened it looked older than his age, eyes clouded by decades of secrets. He denied everything said. He'd never heard of Emily Carter, never been to Pennsylvania, never worked near a diner. But inside his trailer, beneath layers of dust, police found something they couldn't ignore. An old toolbox with initials scratched on the lid. Forensics tested it. Inside the handle was a partial print pressed into rust preserved by time. They ran it through the updated system. It was Emily's. The discovery sent shockwaves through Millstone. Local news resurrected the story, cold case breakthrough after 38 years. Evidence ties suspect to missing woman. Cameras swarmed Emily's mother's front yard. For the first time in decades, Margaret Carter smiled. "I knew she'd come back," she said softly, though her daughter's body was still missing. But the case was far from over. DNA on the fabric and Emily's fingerprint in the toolbox weren't enough to convict. Prosecutors needed a confession or a direct connection, and that's when fate or something darker intervened. In October 2022, construction workers digging near the old train tracks unearthed a shallow grave. Bones, clothing fragments, a faded bracelet with the name Emily engraved. Time had stolen almost everything, but not the truth. Forensic tests confirmed the remains belonged to Emily Carter. The position of the bones told a story of violence, defensive wounds on the forearms, a fractured jaw, and the remnants of a plastic cable tie still looped around one wrist. Whoever had killed her wanted control. When Mark Hargrove was confronted with the findings, he laughed a hollow, rasping sound that made even seasoned officers uneasy. "You can't prove what's in the dirt," he said. But deep down, he knew time had finally turned against him. He refused to provide a DNA sample voluntarily. The court ordered one. It took weeks, but when the results came back, they were irrefutable. The skin cell from the torn fabric matched 99.98% to him. Detective Price stared at the screen in silence when the results appeared. One fingerprint, one cell had just closed a circle that began before she was even born. The file that had haunted the department for nearly 4 decades now had a name. The arrest made national headlines. Reporters called it the ghost print case. Commentators said it was proof that no secret can stay buried forever. But beneath the celebration, there was something uneasy, a sense that justice had come too late. Margaret Carter attended the press conference in a blue dress the same color as the shoe found in the woods. When asked how she felt, she simply said, relieved, but not free. That night after the cameras left, she walked once more to the clearing near the tracks. The trees had grown taller, the air colder. She placed fresh flowers on the spot and whispered, "They found you, sweetheart. They finally found you." The wind carried her words into the darkness, where the echoes of the past still lingered like footsteps in the rain. But even as the town exhaled, another whisper rose from the files still stacked in the evidence room, from the photographs fading under fluorescent light. Because sometimes when one cold case closes, another begins to stir. The interrogation room smelled like metal and coffee. The walls were gray, the clock ticking just loud enough to remind everyone that time was finally catching up. Mark Hargrove sat at the table, wrists chained, face unreadable. Across from him, Detective Hannah Price leaned forwards, elbows on the metal, her voice calm but cutting through the air like a blade. "You've had 38 years to come up with a story," she said, "so let's hear it." He smirked the kind of smirk that hides fear behind arrogance. "There's nothing to tell," he muttered. "I don't even know this girl." Price slid a photograph across the table. Emily Carter smiling, holding a coffee pot at the diner, her name tag slightly crooked. "You were there that night," she said. "We have your DNA, your prints, your connection. You don't walk away from that mark." He stared at the photo for a long time, then laughed under his breath. "You think you found something," he whispered, "but you don't know what you're looking at." Outside the interrogation room, cameras flashed. The town of Millstone had become a stage. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Neighbors revisited memories they'd buried, and for the first time in decades, people spoke Emily's name again. The headlines screamed, "Cold case solved after nearly 4 decades." But inside the station, no one felt like celebrating, because nothing about Mark's behavior fit. No guilt, no panic, no remorse, just silence. Detective Price replayed his words in her head as she stared out the window that night. The rain had returned softer this time, steady against the glass. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The DNA was perfect. The evidence was solid. But his reactions? They didn't fit the pattern of a man cornered by truth. He wasn't denying out of fear. He was enjoying it. She pulled Emily's file back onto her desk, flipping through every old report. Photographs, statements, maps. And there, on page 47 of the original investigation, a note scribbled by Detective Frank Daly, now long retired possible second vehicle, near scene. Unconfirmed. Witness unreliable. Price froze. A second vehicle. That detail had never been followed up. The next morning, she called the old detective. He answered after 3 rings, his voice slow but sharp. "Daly," he said, coughing. When she introduced herself, he laughed softly. "You're the one who caught the ghost, huh? Took you kids long enough." She asked about the second vehicle. The line went quiet. "Yeah," he said. "Finally, there was a witness old man named Keller. Said he saw a van parked across from the diner that night. Claimed it wasn't one of the regulars. But by the time we got there, the rain had washed everything away." Price asked for Keller's address, but Daly sighed. "He's gone now. Died in '98. But his granddaughter might still be around, runs the antique shop downtown." Within an hour, Price was there. The shop smelled of cedar and dust. Lydia Keller, in her 60s, stood behind the counter surrounded by clocks and porcelain figures. When Price mentioned the name Emily Carter, the woman's eyes softened. "My grandfather talked about that night until he died," she said. "Said he saw 2 men outside the diner. One was arguing with the girl. The other was waiting by the van. 2 men. Price's pulse quickened. She showed Lydia a photo of Mark Hargrove. Was this one of them? Lydia frowned, studying it closely. "He looks familiar," she said slowly, "but I think the one by the van had lighter hair. Maybe a brother or someone who looked like him." Back at the precinct, Price reopened the Hargrove file. Mark's brother, David Hargrove, had died in 1991 in a car accident. Single vehicle crash late at night, declared an accident. But something about the timing tugged at her instinct. David had been 28. The crash happened just 7 years after Emily disappeared. There was no DNA from him in the system, no record, no trace. She stared at the timeline on the wall, the red strings stretching across decades. Emily disappears in 1984. David dies in 1991. Mark leaves town right after. The pieces fit too cleanly. What if the wrong brother had lived long enough to face justice? Price went back into the interrogation room. Mark lifted his head lazily as she entered. "You ever think about your brother, Mark?" she asked. His expression flickered a crack in the armor. "Why would I?" he replied. "He's dead." "You two were close," Price said. "Worked together at the auto shop, spent nights drinking at Miller's Tavern. You drove the same kind of van. Sound familiar?" Mark's jaw clenched. Price leaned closer. "What happened that night? Did you pick him up? Did you know what he'd done?" He slammed his fists on the table chains, rattling. "You don't know a damn thing about us," he shouted. Price didn't flinch. "Then tell me," she said quietly. For the first time, he looked tired. "David was the good one," he muttered. "Everyone said that. The one who fixed things. The one Mom trusted. He used to talk to her at the diner, sometimes said she reminded him of our sister." His voice cracked slightly. But something changed that year. He'd been drinking more, getting mean. That night, he came home late, covered in mud, eyes red. I asked what happened. He said, "You don't want to know." So I didn't ask again. He looked up, eyes hollow. Next morning, he gave me that toolbox. Said he didn't need it anymore. Told me to leave town for a while. I did. When I came back, he was gone dead on the highway. That's all I know. Price watched him carefully. The story fit too perfectly, almost rehearsed. But the detail about the toolbox, the one with Emily's fingerprint, twisted everything. If David had given it to him, it could explain why her print was there. It also meant that the real killer might have died 30 years ago. Still, Price wasn't convinced. She needed more than a story. She needed proof. She called the coroner's office to request the file on David Hargrove's death. The records were thin. It was ruled an accident, no autopsy, beyond toxicology. But one note stood out: unusual lacerations on hands consistent with blunt object impact, possibly from steering wheel. Blunt object, or maybe a struggle. She requested the crash photos from archives. When the images loaded, something made her blood run cold. On the driver's wrist, partially visible beneath the sleeve, was a plastic tie looped tight, the same kind found on Emily's remains. Price felt the air leave her lungs. It couldn't be coincidence. She called Vega, the forensic technician, and asked her to pull the sample from the crash site evidence if any remained. There wasn't much, just a small blood sample on the seatbelt buckle, degraded, but possibly viable. Vega agreed to run a comparison. It would take days. In the meantime, Price faced a decision. Should she tell Margaret Carter, the mother who had waited nearly 40 years, that the man in custody might not be the killer? That justice might have died decades earlier. She drove to Margaret's house at dusk. The porch light was still on, as it had been every night since Emily vanished. Margaret opened the door slowly, her face lined with years of waiting. "Detective," she said softly. "Do you have news?" Price hesitated. "We're still working through the evidence," she said carefully, "but there's a chance that someone else was involved." Margaret's eyes didn't waver. "I always thought there was," she said. "You can feel it. You know evil never works alone." Price left the house with those words echoing in her head. Evil never works alone. The next morning, Vega called. Her voice was shaking. "Hannah," she said, "you need to see this." At the lab, Vega pointed at the monitor. The blood from the crash site, David's, matched the partial DNA found under Emily's fingernails. The print on the fabric still tied to Mark, but the primary struggle belonged to David. Two brothers. One crime, one dead one alive, bound by a secret they carried into the grave. Price felt both victory and sorrow twisting inside her. The truth had arrived, but it wasn't clean. The fingerprint that solved the case wasn't the mark of one killer, it was the shadow of two lives tangled in guilt and silence. That evening, Mark Hargrove was officially charged as an accessory to murder. The press called it closure. The headlines blazed: "Cold case cracked by DNA, family secrets revealed." But Price knew closure was a myth. The mother still had no daughter. The town still had no peace. She stood again in the woods behind Ridgefield Road, where it had all begun. The trees whispered in the wind leaves, rustling like old paper. She thought of the rain that night, the scream no one heard, the brother who tried to bury what couldn't stay buried. And for a moment, she understood what Daly had meant when he said some ghosts never fade. They just wait for the right storm. Behind her, thunder rolled in the distance. The sky darkened heavy with the same kind of rain that once swallowed the truth. Price turned back toward her car, the mud soft beneath her boots. Somewhere in that cold air, it felt like Emily Carter was finally being heard, not as a victim lost in time, but as a name that refused to disappear. The courthouse was silent when the verdict came down: accessory to murder. The words hung in the air like frost. Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed, but Detective Hannah Price didn't move. Mark Hargrove stared ahead, jaw set, unblinking. No reaction, no plea, no tears. As the deputies led him away, he turned once toward Price and said quietly, almost to himself, "You still don't know everything." Then he smiled, that same hollow, knowing smile that had followed her through every sleepless night of the case. Outside, the world moved too quickly. News vans lined the streets, microphones lunged forward, the word justice tossed around like a headline that no one truly believed. The Millstone Gazette printed, "One fingerprint ends a cold case that haunted generations," but inside the police department there was no celebration. Price sat at her desk, staring at the photo of Emily Carter, the same one Detective Daly had once pinned above his own. The girl's eyes were too alive, too bright. "We got him," Vega said softly from the doorway. Price nodded, but her voice was barely a whisper. "Did we?" 2 weeks later, the evidence room flooded. A broken pipe, years of humidity, a slow leak that had gone unnoticed. Boxes were stacked haphazardly. Labels smeared. Price came down to help the cleanup crew. She was lifting soggy files when she saw it, a small sealed envelope marked E17, not B14, not the torn fabric, something else. Inside was a photograph, faded and warped with moisture, a picture of a van parked behind the diner. The timestamp, March 3rd, 1984, 9:58 p.m. Almost an hour before Emily disappeared. The camera that captured it was from a gas station 2 blocks away, one that had supposedly been offline that night. Price frowned. If the timestamp was real, someone had kept this image out of the file. She flipped it over, a handwriting she didn't recognize. For your eyes only, FD. Her chest tightened. Frank Daly, the original detective. Why would he hide this? Why not mention it in his notes? She called him immediately, but there was no answer. The next day, she drove out to his house, a small cabin outside town, quiet curtains drawn. The mailbox was stuffed with unread letters. When she knocked, no one came. The neighbor, an older man with a cane, appeared on the porch next door. "You looking for Frank?" he asked. She nodded. "Haven't seen him in a week. Used to take his dog out every morning. Dog's been howling at night lately. You might want to check inside." She did. The door was unlocked. The smell hit her first stale air and something faintly metallic. She called out his name. No answer. The living room was cluttered with old case files, photos, maps of Millstone pinned to the wall, and in the center of the desk lay a revolver. Beside it, a note, handwritten and short. The rain never stopped. Frank Daly was dead. Gunshot wound to the chest. No sign of struggle, no forced entry. The coroner would call it suicide. But as Price stood there, eyes scanning the room, something didn't add up. The gun was clean, too clean. No prints, no residue on his hand. She felt the weight of the storm again pressing on her chest. Later, as the forensics team cleared the scene, Vega found a small cassette tape wedged beneath a stack of papers. On the label, one word, Carter. Back at the station, they played it. The sound crackled static, humming like rainfall. Then Daly's voice, older, slower, but sharp. "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't finish what I started. Emily Carter wasn't just a random abduction. It was part of something bigger, something I should have seen." A pause, a breath. "The night she disappeared, I got a call from an unknown number. Male voice. Said he had information about her. Told me to meet him behind the diner. When I got there, there was a van and someone watching from across the street. I followed, but I lost them near the river. A week later, the witness recanted. I was warned to drop it. I didn't." The recording hissed. "If you're reopening this look for the van, look for the badge number on the report. It wasn't a random killer." Price froze. Badge number. She scrubbed through the old files, page after page, report after report, and there it was. A responding officer listed as Patrolman David Keller, same surname as the witness, but no relation. Badge hash 2147. No follow-up ever documented. Vega frowned. "That name's not in current records," she said. Price checked the personnel archive. Keller had resigned suddenly in 1985, just months after the disappearance. No reason listed, no forwarding address. She dug deeper. Old payroll, pension logs, tax records? Nothing. It was as if he'd vanished the same way Emily had. But one note surfaced. In 1987, Keller had applied for a security job under an alias David Kells at a correctional facility in Ohio, a facility later linked to corruption, missing evidence, and unsolved assaults. Price stared at the name. The timelines overlapped too neatly to ignore. If Keller had been the first on scene and later disappeared, what else had been erased? She called the Ohio facility. The HR clerk hesitated. "Kells. Yeah, that's familiar. Retired years ago. But there was an incident." One of the inmates accused him of the line cut out static roaring through the receiver. When she called back, the number was disconnected. That night, the station felt colder than usual. Price sat alone under the flickering fluorescent light, the tape still playing in her head. It wasn't a random killer. She thought about Daly's note. The rain never stopped. Maybe he wasn't talking about weather. Maybe he meant the corruption that had soaked through everything. She opened Emily's file again. The original 911 log from the night she disappeared was there, faded and barely legible. But at the bottom, under caller, was a name that had never been mentioned in any summary. Officer Keller. He hadn't just responded. He was the one who reported her missing. Vega joined her quietly. "You think he was involved?" she asked. Price didn't answer. She turned the page. The diner's closing record signed by Emily, 10:45 p.m., but another signature appeared below hers. One no one had noticed before, faint and slanted, D. Keller. The air left the room. Vega whispered, "He was there." At dawn, they drove back to the old diner, now abandoned again after the brief media attention. The paint was peeling, the windows boarded up. Price pushed open the door flashlight, cutting through the dust. The air was heavy, almost sacred, in its silence. Near the counter, she found the spot where the purse had been found decades ago. Behind the register, the floor creaked. She crouched, pried up a loose plank, and there, embedded in the dirt beneath, was a metal badge. Tarnished, bent, almost unrecognizable, but the engraving still clear, 2147. Vega covered her mouth. Price stared at the badge like it was breathing. The number from Daly's tape, Keller's badge. The ghost in the rain had a name after all. When the lab confirmed the badge's age and serial number, the case twisted again. Keller had died in 2003, a supposed heart attack at home in Ohio. His body was cremated. No samples left, no way to test DNA. But the diner floorboards told their own story. Buried there beneath decades of dust, they found a rusted key. Not just any key. A diner key, the same model Emily had lost the night she disappeared. The same key, missing from her keyring, found on the floor. It meant she dropped it there, or someone had taken it from her to lock the door after she was gone. And if Keller had the badge, the access, and the timing, he could have been the one who lured her outside. The one who made it look like she vanished into the storm. Price leaned back in her chair, heart pounding as she connected the dots. Mark and David Hargrove might have taken her, but someone else had opened the door. Someone inside the system had made sure no one found her until the storm washed everything away. The truth was spreading like cracks in glass, one layer at a time, each reveal cutting deeper. The cold case that had haunted generations wasn't just about a missing girl. It was about a town that had let its ghosts live quietly in plain sight. That night, Price returned to Daly's cabin one last time. The rain had started again, light, steady, endless. She stood in the doorway, tape recorder in hand, and whispered, "You were right." The rain never stopped. The forest around her seemed to listen. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like an answer. The badge lay under the glass case in the evidence room like a piece of cursed history. Number 2147. The ghost of Officer David Keller. Forensics confirmed its authenticity within hours, the alloy composition, the engraving style. Everything matched the badges issued in 1983, and yet there was no official record of it ever being reported missing. It was as if the badge had been erased the same night Emily Carter disappeared. Detective Hannah Price stood in front of the display, staring at it as if it might still hold a heartbeat. The realization was spreading through her like ice. Someone in uniform had been part of it from the very beginning. A cop had helped bury Emily Carter and then disappeared behind the veil of bureaucracy that had kept her case cold for nearly 4 decades. When Price submitted a formal request for Keller's personnel file, it was denied. Restricted under departmental privacy, the system replied. She tried again through a different portal, only to find the file had been reclassified as sealed under federal review. That was impossible. The department didn't have the authority to do that. Someone higher up was pulling strings. She stormed into the captain's office. "Who sealed Keller's file?" she demanded. Captain Briggs didn't look surprised. He was an old-school officer, the kind who spoke in riddles and survived scandals by knowing when to look the other way. "It's not our concern anymore," he said flatly. "The FBI is taking over." The FBI Price echoed, her pulse spiking, since when Briggs handed her a printed memo dated that morning. They reopened the Keller file as part of a federal inquiry into historical misconduct cases. "You've done good work, detective, but this one's above your pay grade now." She felt the anger rise, sharp and raw. You can't just shut it down, she snapped. We found new evidence. Keller's badge was at the crime scene. His name's on the log. Briggs cut her off with a look. You think I don't know that? His voice dropped. Listen to me. You keep digging, you'll find things you don't want to find. People who were never supposed to be part of this. Let it go. But she couldn't. That night, Price sat in her car outside the precinct long after everyone else had gone home. The rain blurred the windshield headlights, smeared into silver streaks. She replayed Daly's tape in her head. It wasn't a random killer. It made sense now. Daly hadn't killed himself. He'd been silenced. She drove to Vega's apartment around midnight, banging on the door until her colleague opened it, bleary-eyed but alert, the moment she saw Price's face. They're covering something up, Price said. The FBI's not taking this because of Keller. They're taking it because of who Keller was working with. Together, they pulled Keller's old financial records, the ones they'd already copied before the file was sealed. There were unexplained payments starting 2 weeks before Emily's disappearance, cash deposits steady increasing until the night she vanished. Each transaction linked to an account under a shell company called Grayfield Logistics. Vega traced it through a maze of old tax IDs and dummy corporations until they hit a familiar name. Frank Daly, she whispered. Price's breath caught. No, she said, shaking her head. That's not possible. But the document didn't lie. Daly's name was listed as a consultant for Grayfield in 1985, 1 year after Emily's disappearance. The betrayal hit like a gut punch. Had Daly been part of it? Was his suicide a cleanup, or guilt finally catching up? Price didn't want to believe it, but she needed answers. The next morning, she drove to the county archives, a brick building that smelled like old paper and secrets. In the microfilm room, she scrolled through public records until she found Grayfield's registration form. Listed under management, Keller D. and Daly F. Her hands went cold. They'd been partners. She leaned back, staring at the screen as the rain hammered against the window. What had started as a case about a missing woman had turned into something poisonous, a network of corruption that had stretched across decades, hiding behind badges and files and silence. When she returned to the station, Briggs was waiting. We need to talk, he said. His tone was calm, but his eyes were not. He closed the blinds, motioned for her to sit. You've been asking questions you shouldn't. I got a call from the Bureau this morning. They're requesting you step back from the investigation effective immediately. Price stared at him incredulous. You're benching me. I'm protecting you, he said quietly. They're not happy about what you've been pulling from restricted databases. You think this is about one badge. It's not. It's about 30 years of covered tracks. You push too far, you'll end up like Daly. She stood. Maybe that's exactly why I should keep going. Briggs sighed. You don't know who you're dealing with. She left without another word. That night, her apartment felt heavier than usual. Every creak in the hallway sounded like footsteps. Every car passing by made her flinch. She opened her laptop, encrypted her files, and sent copies to Vega. If anything happens to me, she said over the phone, you keep digging. Vega didn't argue. She just said always. 2 days later, Vega disappeared. She didn't show up for work. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her car was found at a gas station off Highway 19, door-locked keys still inside. The surveillance cameras disabled. Price's world tilted. The Bureau released a statement saying Vega had been called to assist in another jurisdiction. But Price knew the language of cover-ups. She'd written those same reports years ago, back when she was still naive enough to think the truth had an open door. She drove to Vega's apartment, let herself in with the spare key. The lights were off. On the kitchen counter, Vega's coffee mug still half full. Her laptop gone. Only one thing left behind, a single sticky note pressed under a coaster. 2 words written hastily, Grayfield Files. Price drove straight to the storage unit where Vega kept her backup drives. The lock had been cut. Inside empty shelves. Only dust and one folder lying on the floor. Inside that folder, a photograph of Keller and Daly side by side at a groundbreaking ceremony. The caption read, Millstone Industrial Park, 1984. The date 3 weeks before Emily Carter disappeared. It was all connected. The company, the cops, the land. Emily had worked at the diner that served the construction crews from that site. She'd seen something, heard something, and for that, she'd been erased. Price's breath trembled. She sat in her car staring at the photo as thunder cracked overhead. That's when she noticed the man standing just behind them in the picture half-cropped out of frame. The face was familiar. Captain Briggs. She drove straight to his house. No warrant, no backup, just a storm chasing her headlights. When he opened the door, his expression didn't even flicker. "I was expecting you," he said. "You were part of it," she said, voice low but shaking. He didn't deny it. "I was young, stupid. Keller said it was a cleanup job, nothing serious. A girl who'd been snooping around the site. Said she'd stolen blueprints. I didn't know what they'd done until it was too late." Price's hand hovered near her gun. "And you covered it up." He nodded slowly. "And I've been paying for it every day since." She stepped closer. "Daily. He found out years later. Tried to expose it. Keller threatened him. When Keller died, Daly thought it was over. But when you reopened the case..." Briggs sighed. Someone decided to finish what Keller started. Her stomach turned. "You mean Vega?" He looked away. "You weren't supposed to find the badge." For a moment, the room went silent, except for the thunder outside. Then Price said, "Where is she?" Briggs didn't answer. Instead, he reached into a drawer, pulled out an envelope, and placed it on the table. "She sent me this before she vanished," he said quietly. "Said if anything happened to her, I should give it to you." Price opened it. Inside was a single USB drive, labeled simply Echo. Briggs looked at her eyes hollow. "You still have a choice. Walk away, or you'll end up like the rest of us." She pocketed the drive, turned toward the door. "No," she said. "I'm done walking away." Outside, the rain poured harder, washing over the street, turning every shadow into motion. Somewhere behind her, the thunder rolled again, but this time it sounded closer, heavier, like the sky itself was warning her to stop. She didn't. She drove into the night with the flash drive burning a hole in her pocket, unaware that she was no longer the hunter. Someone was already following her headlights, steady, distant, and patient. The rain didn't stop all night. It clung to the glass, drumming on the windshield, as Detective Hannah Price drove toward the edge of town, where streetlights thinned into blackness. Every mile felt heavier. The headlights in her rearview mirror hadn't left her since she pulled away from Captain Briggs's house, always there, steady too far to make out the face behind the wheel, but too close to ignore. She pressed the gas. The car behind her did the same. At a fork in the road, she killed her headlights, veered right onto a dirt path, and waited in the dark. The sound of gravel crunching faded. Whoever was following her kept going, swallowed by the storm. She sat there for a long moment, listening to the rain and her own heartbeat. Then she pulled the flash drive from her pocket. Small, black, unlabeled, except for one word scratched in silver ink, Echo. She drove to the only place she trusted, Vega's old lab at the county forensics office. The building was empty at this hour, dark except for the hum of machines left running overnight. She locked the door behind her, powered up an isolated terminal, and inserted the drive. The screen flickered. One folder appeared. Inside it, a single video file named Archive_1. She pressed play. The footage opened with static, then a timestamp, May 18th, 2022, 2:14 a.m. The camera was shaky handheld. Vega's voice filled the room. "If you're watching this, it means I found something I wasn't supposed to." Her face appeared pale in the glow of a desk lamp, eyes wide but steady. The Grayfield files, they're not just about Keller and Daly. There's more. Contracts, payoffs, sealed reports. I traced one of the payments made before Emily Carter's disappearance to an account managed by the Millstone Police Pension Fund. That means someone inside the department was moving money to keep Keller quiet. She hesitated. "There's one more thing, a name I don't recognize. It's on every document, every transfer." She held up a sheet of paper. The name was blurred, but Price could make out enough letters to freeze her blood. R. Briggs. The screen cut to static, then another clip dated the next night. Vega's voice whispering, "Now I think someone's in the building. I hear footsteps. If I don't make it out, the truth is in the drive. Everything." The camera jolted, turned toward the door. A shadow crossed the light. Then the feed went black. Price's hands shook. She replayed the clip 3 times, studying the reflection in the window behind Vega. A figure tall, wearing a raincoat face obscured. The timestamp matched the night Vega vanished. She closed the file and disconnected the drive. Her stomach twisted. Briggs had lied. The man who'd told her to stop digging was the one who'd started everything. The one who'd buried the truth under a lifetime of service and silence. But now she had proof. She copied the file onto 2 blank drives and hid one in the ceiling vent above the lab. The other she slipped into her jacket. Then she called Internal Affairs. No answer. She tried the FBI contact listed on the Keller file. The number rang once, then disconnected. She was on her own. By dawn, the rain had eased into fog. Price parked across the street from Briggs's house, waiting. At 6:47 a.m., the lights came on. He stepped outside in uniform, coffee in hand, looking like any other day. She watched him walk to his car, calm, deliberate. For a man sitting on decades of lies, he looked too composed. She followed him from a distance through back roads and side streets until he turned onto a narrow lane leading to the abandoned Millstone Industrial Park, the same site in the photograph Vega had found. The place was half swallowed by weeds, rusted fences leaning inward like they were tired of standing. He parked near an old warehouse and disappeared inside. Price waited 5 minutes, then followed. The air inside was thick with the smell of oil and rain-soaked metal. Her flashlight cut through dust motes, revealing empty crates, old machinery, and footprints in the dirt, fresh ones leading deeper inside. Then she heard it, a low hum, faint but rhythmic, not machinery, something electrical. She followed the sound until she found a locked room at the back. The door was reinforced with steel and a digital padlock. She crouched, examining it. The wiring looked new, too new for a building that hadn't seen maintenance in 30 years. She took a deep breath and pulled a small pry tool from her pocket. The lock wasn't just a lock, it was wired to an alarm. She disabled it the old-fashioned way, stripping the wires, cutting the circuit before it could send a signal. The door clicked open. Inside was a server room, modern, humming alive, rows of black machines blinking quietly in the dark. She stepped closer. One screen was active, displaying a login prompt under a familiar name, Grayfield Systems. She entered the only password she could think of, 2147, the badge number. The screen flickered, then opened a directory of encrypted files. One of them caught her eye. Project Echo Phase 2. Her pulse quickened. She opened it. A list appeared, names, dates, towns. At first, she didn't understand. Then she saw the pattern. Every name was a missing person, every date a disappearance, every town connected by one thing. All were within districts tied to former Grayfield operations. Dozens of cold cases, all buried, all forgotten. Emily Carter's name was the first. The next page made her blood run cold. A scanned document marked Confidential Federal Use Only. At the top, Department of Justice, Subdivision Behavioral Research Initiative. Below that, a phrase she didn't recognize, Subject Recruitment through Controlled Exposure. She scrolled further. There were photos not just of victims, but of crime scenes staged like experiments, temperature readings, pulse data, notes written in shorthand, clinical detached. It wasn't just corruption, it was testing. People were being abducted, studied their cases disguised as random disappearances. And Keller Daly Briggs, they hadn't been rogue cops. They'd been participants. Price felt her breath falter. She downloaded the files onto her drive, but halfway through the screen flashed red access breach detected. The servers began shutting down one by one. Somewhere behind her, a door creaked. She spun around, gun drawn. Briggs stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "You killed Vega," she said. Her voice shook but didn't break. He didn't deny it. She was going to expose something she didn't understand. You don't either. You think this was about one girl? You have no idea what you're standing in. Then tell me, she demanded. He stepped closer, rain dripping from his coat. Grayfield was never a company. It was a cover and experimental branch under federal funding. They used local police to collect data stage abductions, observe responses. Emily Carter wasn't supposed to die. She was supposed to vanish long enough to measure community reaction. But Keller, lost control. He panicked. He made it real. Price's stomach turned. You turned people into data. He looked tired, almost pleading. It was the Cold War. Everything was an experiment. Fear, obedience, grief. They told us it would help protect the country. We believed them. Until the storm hit and she disappeared for good. Then why keep it going, she asked. He glanced at the servers. Because they never shut it down. They just changed the name. She raised her weapon. Step away from the console. He smiled, faintly. You won't shoot me, Hannah. You still think you're saving something. He reached for the keyboard. She fired once the bullet hit the metal frame beside him, ricocheting into a stack of crates. Sparks flew. Briggs stumbled back, eyes wide. You just lit the fuse, he said softly. The servers began to smoke. One monitor burst into flames. The system was self-destructing. Price grabbed the drive from the port, bolted for the door as fire crawled up the walls. Briggs shouted behind her, voice fading under the roar of the blaze. You can't bury the past, it buries you. She ran into the rain, coughing, clutching the drive like a lifeline. Behind her, the warehouse exploded, a bloom of orange tearing through the fog. The sound echoed across the empty fields, a thunder louder than the sky itself. Price collapsed near her car, soaked, shaking, staring at the glow consuming everything. The flash drive was hot in her hand, but intact. Somewhere inside it was every truth the town had spent 40 years hiding. She whispered to herself, barely audible under the storm. Emily, they can't erase you again. But as the flames reached the sky, she saw headlights in the distance. Not sirens, not police, just a black SUV rolling slowly toward her. No plates, no lights. And for the first time in her life, Hannah Price felt what Emily Carter must have felt on that night long ago, the certainty that the darkness was alive and it knew her name. The SUV stopped 20 feet from her. Engine idling, no headlights. Detective Hannah Price crouched behind the hood of her car, breathing hard, soaked to the bone, clutching the flash drive like a pulse in her fist. The warehouse behind her burned orange against the fog sparks, raining over twisted steel. 2 doors opened. 2 men stepped out, suits, earpieces, no badges. Their movements calm, rehearsed. One of them spoke over the rain. Detective Price, you're in possession of classified federal property. Hand it over. She didn't move. You mean evidence, she said. Evidence of murder. The taller man raised his voice just enough to slice through the wind. That drive contains data obtained illegally from a federal research archive. You're obstructing a national security investigation. She laughed once, a sound half broken. That's the line you're going with. He took a step closer. You've seen things you don't understand. She raised her weapon. Try me. For a moment, everything froze, the hiss of rain, the crackle of fire, the heartbeat inside her ears. Then the second man lifted his hand slightly, and the first stopped advancing. They exchanged a glance, a small silent calculation, before the tall one said, We're not here to arrest you. We're here to contain this. You walk away, now you get to live. That's the deal. Price tightened her grip on the gun. You think I believe that belief's got nothing to do with it, he said. We're the last ones trying to keep what's left of the system intact. She didn't answer. Her mind was running faster than her pulse. 2 of them. No sirens, no backup. She dropped the gun to the side, pretending to give in, then flicked the safety with her thumb, a soft click, drowned by the rain, and fired once into the mud at their feet. The flash startled them just enough for her to dive into her car, slam the door, and peel off down the service road. Bullets followed sharp, clean pops, swallowed by thunder. One hit the rear window, spiderwebbing the glass. She didn't look back. The wipers squealed across the windshield, throwing arcs of muddy water. Her phone buzzed on the seat beside her, an unknown number. Against instinct, she answered. Static. Then a woman's voice, low, urgent. Detective Price. Listen carefully. I can help you. Don't go home. They're already there. Who is this? Someone who used to work for them. How did you get this number? You left it on the Grayfield server when you accessed Project Echo. Price tightened her grip on the wheel. Where do I meet you? Abandoned train depot off Route 19? 1 hour? Come alone. The line cut. Price stared at the phone, mind spinning. Every instinct screamed trap, but what choice did she have? Her apartment was compromised. Her captain was dead. Vega was gone, and the evidence she held could vanish with her if she hesitated. She took a sharp turn toward the highway tires, slicing through puddles. The depot sat like a carcass at the end of the line, rusted tracks disappearing into weeds, roof half collapsed. She killed the engine, scanned the darkness. No movement, just the distant hum of power lines. She stepped inside flashlight, sweeping across graffiti-covered walls. Then she saw her, a woman in her 40s trench coat, damp eyes, sharp. "You came," the stranger said. "Good. My name's Ellen Roth. I was Keller's liaison." Price aimed the gun without hesitation. "You've got 10 seconds to explain." Roth raised her hands. "Back then, I worked for the Behavioral Research Division, the funding arm that built Grayfield. Keller was our field agent. His job was data collection, monitor small-town reactions to disappearances, measure community resilience. It started as simulation. But Keller went off protocol. He made it real. When Daly found out, he tried to blow the whistle. The Bureau buried it." Price's voice was low, and Briggs' local control. Every operation needed one. He kept the paperwork clean. When it collapsed, he pulled Keller out, told everyone it was an internal disciplinary issue. They shut down Grayfield in name only. Price shook her head. "So you just kept experimenting?" Roth's jaw tightened. "Not me. After I filed my report, they erased me from the record. I disappeared too on paper, but I kept copies. I know what's on that drive." Price took a step closer. "Then you also know they killed Vega." Roth's eyes flickered. "They kill anyone who makes noise, and now they'll come for you." A train whistle echoed somewhere far off, ghostly, impossible. Roth glanced toward the sound. "They're triangulating our phones. We've got maybe 10 minutes. She pulled a map from her coat. "There's a journalist in D.C. named Adam Levy. He runs an investigative blog that leaks sealed cases. He's been chasing Grayfield for years. Get to him. He can publish the data before they bury it again." Price folded the map, heart pounding. "Why help me?" Roth exhaled. "Because Emily Carter was my sister." The words hit like a blade. For a second, all sound fell away. "You're lying," Price whispered. Roth shook her head. "Different fathers. She never knew. Our mother gave her up when she was a baby. When she vanished, I joined the program, thinking I could find her from the inside. By the time I realized what they were doing, she was already gone." The depot lights flickered a burst of electricity, then darkness. Roth's eyes widened. "They're here." A beam of light sliced through a broken window flashlights, voices, boots on gravel. Price grabbed Roth's arm, pulling her toward the maintenance tunnel at the far end. They ran through the dark footsteps, echoing against the wet concrete. Behind them, the agents shouted. One fired. The bullet ricocheted off a steel pillar, sparks dancing in the dark. They reached the tunnel exit, a rusted ladder leading up to the street. Price climbed first, pushing the hatch open into the cold night air. The rain had stopped, replaced by fog. She pulled Roth up behind her, both of them gasping. A black SUV screeched into view at the far end of the street. "Run!" Price hissed. They darted between warehouses, shadows melting into shadows. A gunshot cracked. Roth stumbled, hand clutching her side, blood blooming through her coat. Price caught her before she fell. "Stay with me." Roth pressed the map into her hand, breath shallow. "Levy, he's the only one who can end this." Her eyes fluttered. "Tell her I'm sorry." "Who, Emily?" Then she went still. Price sat there in the fog, holding a dying woman who had carried the truth longer than anyone should. Sirens wailed in the distance, finally, but too late. She forced herself up, dragging Roth's body behind a stack of crates before sprinting toward her car. The SUV turned the corner again, lights sweeping across the street. She ducked, slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and tore out of the industrial district before they could block her in. By dawn, she was on the interstate, heading east. Her eyes burned from sleeplessness. Every car in the mirror looked like a threat. She replayed Roth's last words again and again until they blurred into the rhythm of the tires. At a gas station outside Harrisburg, she parked behind a row of trucks and pulled out the flash drive. She opened the laptop on the passenger seat, connected through a stolen Wi-Fi hotspot, and searched for Adam Levy. His site came up instantly. The Watchtower files, recent posts about government surveillance, missing documents, redacted budgets. She composed a short message. "I have the data. Emily Carter, Grayfield, Project Echo, they're coming. She attached an encrypted copy of the files and hit send. The upload bar crawled, 40%, 60, 80, 99. Then the screen froze. A message popped up, connection lost. Her stomach dropped. She tried again. The hotspot was dead. Then her phone lit up a new message from an unknown number. Nice try, detective. Her blood ran cold. She looked around the parking lot, empty, silent. Then she saw it, a security camera on the corner of the roof, red light blinking. Someone was watching the feed in real time. She closed the laptop, ripped out the battery, threw the phone onto the asphalt, and crushed it under her boot. She started the car again, heading south now, following Roth's map through back roads toward the one address circled in red, a farmhouse near the Maryland border. A safe house, maybe, or a trap. At this point, it didn't matter. The sun was rising when she reached it, a gray-white glow cutting through mist over the fields. She parked behind the barn, gun drawn, and stepped inside. The air smelled of hay and gasoline. A single bulb hung from the ceiling. On the table, an old landline phone ringing. Once, twice. She picked it up. Silence. Then a voice low, calm, unmistakable. Briggs. You can't outrun ghosts, Hannah. You burned your city to the ground, she said. I cleaned it, he replied. There's a difference. You killed Vega. You killed Roth. I kept order. She gritted her teeth. I'm not giving you the drive. I don't need it, he said. You already sent it. And we already have Levy. The line went dead. Outside, a helicopter rumbled faintly in the distance. Price stepped out of the barn, looking toward the horizon. A column of black smoke rose miles away toward D.C. Her knees weakened. She didn't need to see to know what it meant. They'd silenced him, too. She looked down at the flash drive in her hand, the last copy of everything. Then she looked at the open field, stretching endlessly ahead. Somewhere beyond it, there had to be one place she could still run the signal, one voice left unbroken. She took a deep breath, slid the drive into her pocket, and started walking toward the dawn. Behind her, the barn phone began ringing again. This time, it didn't stop. The phone kept ringing long after she'd stepped into the mist. Each shrill note trailed her across the field like an echo that refused to die. Detective Hannah Price didn't look back. The flash drive felt heavy in her pocket, heavier than a weapon. Every step sank into wet soil, the sunrise bleeding pale light through fog thick enough to hide in. She walked until the barn was gone and the road appeared cracked asphalt cutting through miles of silence. Her car was a burned shell now left behind near the depot. The highway was crawling with patrols. She couldn't risk another engine, another camera. All she had was the drive, the map, and the clock ticking louder inside her skull. By noon, she reached a small town near the state line Deerbrook, population barely 2,000, the kind of place where strangers were remembered after one glance. She pulled her hood tight and slipped into a diner that smelled of coffee and rain. The waitress smiled automatically. You look like you've been through hell, she said. Hannah forced a faint smile. Still passing through. She chose a corner booth, back to the wall, eyes on the door. The TV over the counter played the morning news. A banner scrolled across the screen. Federal investigator found dead in D.C. explosion, no suspects. The photo beside the headline made her chest seize. Adam Levy. The reporter called it a gas leak. The image behind the anchor showed the same building she'd seen burning on the horizon. Hannah stared until her reflection blurred against the screen. Every link she'd tried to make was being cut one by one. She slid the flash drive onto the table, covering it with her palm. The waitress passed by again. Need anything else? Hannah shook her head. Just a phone. Pay one out front. Outside, the air was cool, crisp. She dialed the only number she still trusted, an old contact in state forensics, Eddie Lawson, a quiet analyst who'd once helped Vega back up sensitive evidence. The line rang 4 times before he answered. Lawson. It's Price. Long silence. Then Jesus, Hannah. Do you know what's happening? I'm in it. I've got the last copy of the echo data. Levy's gone. Vega's dead. They're coming for me next. He exhaled hard. You shouldn't even be on this line. They flagged your credentials. There's a warrant, domestic terrorism charges. Fabricated doesn't matter. It's signed. Hannah's pulse hammered. Listen, I need a way to leak this. Somewhere safe. No trace. Lawson hesitated. There's an independent node, a darknet relay run by whistleblowers. They call it the Archive. You'd need to reach the uplink in Baltimore. After that, it's untouchable. How do I get in? I'll text you coordinates. And, Hannah, if they find you first, they won't arrest you. She hung up before he could finish. Minutes later, her phone buzzed with an encrypted message, a set of GPS coordinates, and one phrase, burn, after reading. She memorized them, then tossed the phone into a storm drain. She left Deerbrook on foot, following the old railway that paralleled the highway. Freight trains roared past, occasionally shaking the ground, drowning out her thoughts. Around dusk, she reached a service yard and found a boxcar left unlocked. She climbed inside, curling against cold metal, the flash drive tucked in her jacket. Sleep came in fragments, flashes of Vega's laugh, Briggs's voice, the sound of rain against steel. She dreamed of Emily Carter standing in the diner doorway, her hair plastered to her face, whispering, "You're next." When she woke, the train was moving. She didn't know how long she'd been asleep. Through the cracks, she saw city lights ahead Baltimore. Her pulse steadied. Almost there. She waited until the train slowed near an industrial district, then jumped, hitting gravel hard enough to tear her palms. The coordinates led her to a shuttered electronics warehouse near the port. The sign above the door was Faded Ecotech Systems. Ironic. She stepped inside, flashlight cutting across rows of broken monitors. At the back, a single red light blinked on a server rack, still drawing power. She approached slowly. A terminal glowed to life as she neared it. Text scrolled across the screen. "Welcome, Detective Price. We've been expecting you." Her stomach dropped. "Lawson," she whispered. The keyboard clicked on its own. "No, but he led you here." Then a new message, "Upload the drive to free her." She froze. "Free who?" Another line appeared. "Vega." Her throat tightened. "She's dead." "Not yet." The room hummed, servers, waking fans spinning faster. Screens flickered to life across the wall, each showing surveillance footage, the diner, the depot, the highway. One feed zoomed in on her face. The system was alive, watching. She yanked the flash drive from her pocket, staring at it. If she plugged it in, maybe it would broadcast everything, or maybe it would erase the last proof she had. She hesitated. Then a voice came through the speakers, faint, distorted, but unmistakably Vega's. "Hannah. It's me. They're using the system to trap us. Don't trust what you see, but you have to finish it. Plug it in. Burn it all." Her breath caught. Vega static, then finish it. She jammed the drive into the port. The screens went white. Code streamed faster than her eyes could follow. One monitor displayed the message, "Upload to archive confirmed 83%. Outside engines roared. Black SUVs screeched into the yard. She had minutes. She barricaded the door with a steel bar, drew her weapon, and crouched behind a crate. The first agent kicked through the side door. Two more followed. Gunfire tore through the air, shredding cables and glass. She fired back, hitting one square in the shoulder. Sparks rained from the servers. The upload hit 91%. "Stop shooting," one agent yelled. "If you damage the system, the data goes public." Good, she thought. Another shot cracked. The bullet grazed her arm, hot pain searing up to her shoulder. She gritted her teeth, fired again, dropping the second man. The third charged forward. She slammed a wrench across his face and felt bone crunch. He went down. The progress bar froze at 97%. "Come on," she hissed, blood dripping onto the keyboard. The last agent stumbled toward the console, reaching for the plug. She shot him once center mass, and he collapsed against the servers, pulling half the cables with him. The screens flickered, then displayed one final message, "Upload complete." Hannah stumbled backward, breathing hard. The air smelled of smoke and ozone. On the main monitor, new text appeared, "Distribution initiated." A map of the world, lit up dots flaring across continents as encrypted packets spread like sparks across a dry field. It was out, unstoppable. She laughed once, hoarse and disbelieving. "You did it, Vega!" But the relief lasted only a heartbeat. The server rack burst into flames, power surging through the circuits. She turned to run, but tripped over debris crashing to the floor. The ceiling groaned. Fire spread fast. She crawled toward the exit, dragging herself through smoke, coughing until her vision blurred. Outside, the night was chaos sirens, flashing lights, men shouting orders. She stumbled behind a dumpster, pressing a cloth to her bleeding arm. Across the yard, the warehouse glowed red, then collapsed inward with a thunderous roar. No one saw her slip away through the alley. She moved like a shadow until the noise faded behind her. The rain started again, soft, steady, washing the blood from her hands. Hours later, in a motel outside the city, she sat on the edge of the bed, watching the news. The headline crawled across every network. Now leaked files reveal secret federal experiment. Dozens of missing persons linked to police corruption. Emily Carter's name flashed first. Then Vega's. Then Daly's. Hannah felt tears she didn't notice until they hit her palms. The world finally knew. The ghosts had names again. But the broadcast ended with a warning. Authorities have not confirmed the source of the leak. A nationwide search is underway for Detective Hannah Price, wanted for espionage and murder. Her face appeared on the screen, tired, rain-streaked eyes hollow. She turned off the TV. The silence that followed was deeper than relief, heavier than guilt. Somewhere out there, the truth was alive. That had to be enough. She lay back on the bed, listening to the rain tap against the window. For the first time in years, she let her eyes close without fear. But across town, in a federal office, still lit after midnight, a man watched the same broadcast. He paused the screen on Hannah's face, leaned forward, and smiled. "Phase 2 complete," he said quietly. "Begin recovery." And somewhere deep inside a government server humming beneath Washington, a new folder appeared, Project Echo Phase 3. Morning came without light. A gray sky pressed down on the motel like a lid, the kind of quiet that follows disaster. Detective Hannah Price woke to the sound of sirens far away and the smell of damp carpet. Her arm ached where the bullet had grazed her. The blood had dried into a thin, rust-colored line. She sat up slowly, ears tuned to every sound. Trucks on the highway, a dog barking, a TV somewhere next door blaring the same headline she'd seen before she passed out, Project Echo Leak Sparks Federal Firestorm. She pulled the curtain a few inches. 2 black SUVs rolled past the parking lot, unmarked, slow. She stepped back, heart hammering. They hadn't found her yet, but they were closing in. On the small table lay the only things she had left. A change of clothes from the vending rack downstairs, a pocket knife, and an envelope she'd found slipped under the door sometime during the night. No name, just a single sheet of paper inside. Printed text block letters. "Stop running. We can protect you. Bring the drive. Exit. 9 I-95 North Midnight." She stared at it until the words blurred. They didn't know she'd already uploaded the data, or maybe they did, and they wanted to erase the source completely. Either way, the message meant only one thing. Someone inside the bureau still wanted her alive, but only long enough to make her disappear properly. She burned the note in the sink, watched the flame curl the edges, and packed what little she had. The world outside was shifting fast. On the motel's flickering TV, she saw talking heads shouting over each other, senators demanding hearings, anchors calling it the largest internal scandal since Watergate. Words like human testing, federal black sites, behavioral manipulation. Names of victims scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Emily Carter led the list. For a moment, Hannah forgot to breathe. Reporters were already camping outside police departments, demanding answers. Briggs's face flashed briefly on the screen, missing the caption read, "Officially, no one could locate him." She knew better. He was hiding behind the same people, now pretending to investigate him. She left the motel before noon, blending into a crowd at a nearby bus terminal. Cameras panned the concourse posters, with her face tacked to every entrance wanted for espionage and murder. She kept her head low hoodie up. Each announcement crackled like static through her nerves. A bus to Philadelphia was boarding. She paid cash, took the backseat, eyes on the road that stretched away from everything she'd ever trusted. Through the window, she watched the countryside blur mile after mile until the world looked washed clean by the rain. Halfway there, a news alert buzzed on the overhead monitor, breaking former Captain Raymond Briggs found dead in apparent suicide. Hannah's pulse froze. The image showed a cordoned-off marina, a car pulled from the water license plate barely visible. Authorities believe the death is connected to the ongoing Project Echo investigation, the anchor said, though no official comment has been released. She turned away, trying to decide if it was guilt relief or fear crawling up her spine. Briggs was gone, but the man who'd watched her face on that midnight screen wasn't. Phase 3, he'd said. Whatever that meant, it hadn't ended with the leak. The bus rattled into the city by dusk. Sirens echoed through narrow streets, helicopters circling above government buildings. Protesters filled the squares, handmade signs reading, "We are not data," and "Where are the others?" Hannah moved through them like smoke anonymous among the angry. In an alley behind a shuttered cafe, she found an old payphone and called the one number she hadn't dared to before the newsroom hotline of the national paper now leading the coverage. A young voice answered, nervous. "Metro desk. This is about Echo," she said. "Tell your editor the source is still alive." Silence. Then, "Who is this?" She hung up. Back on the street, a man brushed past her, slipping something into her pocket so smoothly she barely felt it. She spun around, but he was gone in the crowd. She reached into her jacket. Another note, smaller this time, handwritten. "We saw your upload. They're rewriting it. Meet us Pier 47 midnight." Her gut clenched. They're rewriting it. That meant the files were being doctored, buried under counterleaks, twisted to look like conspiracy fiction. The truth was bleeding out before it could even breathe. She walked until the harbor smell of salt hit her. Pier 47 was quiet, half abandoned. Fishing boats rocked gently, chains clinking. Midnight came and went. Then footsteps echoed behind her. She turned, gun raised, finger tight on the trigger. A man in a windbreaker stepped out of the shadows, hands visible. "Easy," he said. "I'm a journalist. Name, Michael Dane. Independent. I used to work with Levy. She didn't lower the gun. Levy's dead. I know. That's why I'm here. He sent me copies of his files, everything you sent him before the blast. We've been verifying it, but something's changing in the data. Whole sections are disappearing from public mirrors. Someone's rewriting history in real time." Hannah stepped closer, scanning his face for deceit. "Why contact me?" "Because we can't stop it without the original key. The drive you used, it's encrypted to your ID. If you vanish, everything you exposed goes dark again." He handed her a burner phone. "There's a secure upload tunnel still active. You walk away, they win. You finish it, you're gone for good." She studied him. Gone meaning dead, gone meaning invisible. "We have people who can make that happen." Far out in the bay, lightning flashed. The storm was coming back. Hannah looked down at the phone, at the blinking cursor, waiting for her decision. She thought of Vega, of Emily's mother, leaving wildflowers at the edge of the woods every year. Justice, she thought, isn't about surviving it. It's about finishing it. She nodded once. "Tell me where." They drove through the city in silence, rain streaking across the windshield. Dane led her into an old printing warehouse, now filled with humming routers and tired faces, journalists, coders, activists. Screens showed live maps of servers across the world trying to block or corrupt the Echo files. "They're pushing counter-disinformation," Dane said. "We fight back, but it's a war of seconds." Hannah handed him their flash drive. "This is the original." He plugged it in carefully, fingers trembling. The system recognized it instantly. Authentication match price Hannah level alpha. The upload began again, faster this time, routed through dozens of encrypted nodes. As they watched, new files appeared, folders that hadn't been visible before. One was labeled Phase 3, Behavioral Reintegration. Dane opened it, and the room went still. The documents weren't about experiments anymore, they were about containment. A strategy guide for shaping public reaction once the truth leaked, how to seed denial, manufacture doubt, flood social media with false confessions. Step-by-step instructions on how to drown the truth in noise. "This was never about hiding the past," Hannah whispered. It was about controlling the future. Outside, thunder rolled closer. The upload hit 100%. Across dozens of screens, mirrored servers lit up green, proof that every file, every image, every signature had gone public beyond deletion. Dane smiled faintly. It's done. Then all the lights died. The room plunged into darkness. Generators whined, monitors flickered. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then a voice, synthetic and calm, echoed from the speakers. Unauthorized duplication detected. Initiating data purge. Hannah's blood froze. They built a failsafe. Dane grabbed the main power switch. If we cut it manually... No, she said, pulling the drive free. They'll trace the line. We have to move. They bolted for the exit as every monitor flared red. Fire alarms screamed. Sparks rained from the ceiling. By the time they reached the street, the entire building was glowing from within. Another explosion ripped through the night, a wave of heat chasing them down the alley. They didn't stop running until the city lights were distant, and the only sound left was the rain. Hannah looked back once. The plume of smoke rising over Baltimore looked just like the one she'd seen over D.C., the pattern repeating. Dane leaned against the wall, panting. We still have the net copies, he said. They can't erase them all. She wasn't so sure. Somewhere someone had expected this. She took a deep breath, watching lightning dance across the harbor. They'll rebuild again, she said quietly. Then we hit them again. For how long? As long as it takes. She turned toward the dark horizon, the rain washing the blood and soot from her face. The world was awake now, angry. Confused but awake. Maybe that was enough. Maybe. Somewhere above the clouds, a satellite blinked to life. In a secure facility hundreds of miles away, a technician entered a new access code. A folder appeared on his screen, Project Echo Phase 4, and beneath it a new name, Subject H. Price. Rain washed the smoke from Baltimore through the night. Hannah Price moved through it like a ghost hair plastered to her face coat, heavy with soot. Behind her, sirens screamed toward what was left of the printing warehouse. In front of her, the city glowed red from burning power lines and streetlights. Somewhere inside that blaze, every ally she had left was either dead or running. She ducked into an underpass, catching her breath. The flash drive was gone, now melted, destroyed, but she could still feel its weight in her pocket, as if her body hadn't realized the burden was over. She leaned against the concrete, staring at the dark river sliding under the bridge. For a long moment, she thought about letting it take her about how simple it would be to disappear into silence. Then headlights swept across the underpass and she was moving again. Instinct overruled exhaustion. 2 days later, the world had turned upside down. From every cafe radio, every cheap television and shop windows came the same refrain hearings, resignations, missing data, and denials. Project Echo had become a household word proof of everything paranoid people had whispered about for decades. Crowds filled city squares demanding names. Others demanded revenge. Whole police departments collapsed under investigations. But Hannah didn't watch any of it. She couldn't. She was living beneath it, buried in the noise. She found shelter in a construction trailer at the edge of an abandoned lot outside Wilmington. It smelled of oil and rust. She cleaned her wound with bottled water, taped it shut with duct tape, and tried to sleep, but the radio on the table kept bleeding news through the static. Anonymous sources suggest the whistleblower may still be alive. Federal task forces are cooperating across state lines. Her name wasn't spoken, but she felt it behind every sentence. She turned the radio off and sat in the dark, whispering to the silence. They're already rewriting me. At dawn, she slipped into a second-hand store and bought a pair of overalls, a baseball cap, and a pair of sunglasses too big for her face. The clerk didn't look up. Money still worked. Identity didn't. By afternoon, she reached a freight yard. Trains rolled slow, endless, indifferent. She waited until the guards turned their backs and climbed into a refrigerated car bound north. Inside it smelled of metal and cold air. She wrapped herself in a tarp and listened to the wheels clatter out a rhythm that almost sounded like words, keep going, keep going, keep going. She dreamed in flashes, Vega laughing under fluorescent lights, Emily Carter turning toward her face half-lit, whispering, "It never ends." When she woke, the train was stopped. Voices outside. She peered through a crack. Federal uniforms. Dogs. They were searching each car. She slipped toward the rear, found the emergency latch, and jumped into a ditch as the dogs started barking. She crawled through mud until she reached a drainage tunnel, the sound of boots echoing above her. Her pulse beat loud enough to drown the world. Hours later, she emerged miles away, lungs burning, knees scraped raw. She limped into a gas station and stole a phone charger, a protein bar, and a newspaper from the rack. The headline across the front page stopped her cold. Project Echo Leak deemed fabricated FBI blames foreign interference. Her throat tightened. The government had already flipped the story. Overnight, the truth had become treason. The victims' names were now placeholders, the documents synthetic data. Everything she'd risked was turning into myth. She read the fine print. A federal cybersecurity unit has confirmed a deepfake operation targeting national trust. The alleged whistleblower is wanted for multiple homicides. Beneath it, her photograph again this time captioned, "Fugitive suspect Hannah Price." She crumpled the paper, threw it into the trash, and walked out before anyone could see her shaking. By nightfall, she'd reached the coast. The sea was gray, endless. A fishing boat rocked at the pier engine, idling, captain smoking. He was old eyes sharp. She approached slowly. "You heading north depends who's asking." "Cash," she said, showing the wad she'd saved. "No questions." He studied her a beat too long, then nodded toward the deck. "Storm's coming." "You sure?" She glanced at the horizon. The clouds were black rolling, always. They left the harbor under lightning. The boat creaked, salt spray stinging her face. For a while, the noise of the engine drowned the world. Then the captain spoke over the wind. "You, the woman they're looking for." She froze. "What makes you say that everyone's looking for someone?" He spat into the sea. "Doesn't matter. Government's lying again. They always do." She didn't answer. The waves grew heavier, each one slamming the hull like a warning. She looked out across the dark water and saw flashes of coastline fading behind her. For the first time in weeks, there was no ground under her feet. They reached open water by dawn. The storm had passed. The captain pointed toward the horizon. "There's a cargo ship out there. Foreign flag. They don't check papers. You want to disappear? That's your ride." She nodded, handed him the rest of the cash. "Thank you." He gave a small, knowing smile. "Don't thank me, girl. Just make it mean something." She climbed down into the skiff, rowing toward the massive silhouette rising through fog. Each pull of the oar felt like erasing a life. When she reached the hull, a rope ladder dangled down. She climbed, muscles screaming. A crewman hauled her over the railing, said nothing, just pointed toward the deckhouse. Inside, the ship hummed with low machinery. She found an empty cabin and collapsed on the bunk. For a long time, she stared at the porthole, watching the ocean swallow the wake behind them. Somewhere beyond that horizon, people were marching under banners of her name, some calling her a hero, others a traitor. Senators promised accountability, while agencies purged their records. Briggs was gone, but new men wore his silence. Phase 4 was moving invisible. On the ship's small radio, she caught fragments of news in half a dozen languages. Protests spreading overseas. Servers mirrored again by anonymous groups calling themselves the Carters. One voice, a woman's, broke through clearly. "They can erase data, not memory. The truth is out there, carried by those who saw it." Hannah turned the dial until the signal vanished. She didn't know if the voice was real or if she was hearing Vega again. Night fell hard. She stepped onto the deck wind, whipping her hair. The ocean stretched black and endless, no lights, no borders. She thought of Emily's mother leaving flowers every year, of Vega's last breath, of Daly's note. The rain never stopped. Maybe it never would. Maybe that was the point. A sailor passed by, nodding politely. He didn't ask her name. She realized that for the first time, she didn't have one that mattered. The world had already rewritten her, filed her under myth or monster. But somewhere inside, the chaos truth was moving on its own, unstoppable, unkillable. She whispered to the wind, "You can't bury what's already breathing." Far above the clouds, a satellite adjusted its orbit, its sensors turning toward the ship cutting north through the Atlantic. In a control room, thousands of miles away, a technician marked a new target on his screen. Subject H. Price active. Hannah looked up at the first streak of dawn breaking through the storm clouds. The light hit her face like fire, and she smiled, small, defiant. "Come find me," she said. The cargo ship cut north through an ocean the color of lead. Wind hissed along the deck rails, ropes creaking with the rhythm of endless waves. Hannah Price leaned against the cold steel wall outside her cabin, eyes on the horizon where sea and sky blurred into one. 3 days had passed since she'd boarded. 3 days of quiet that felt borrowed, not earned. She had no passport, no name on the manifest. The crew didn't ask questions. They'd seen too many ghosts drift through their ship to care about one more. She ate with them in silence, learned their faces, but not their language, slept in the same clothes she'd worn when Baltimore burned. The wound on her arm had begun to heal, a thin pink scar running along her skin, proof that pain could close even when the story didn't. At night, she listened to the radio in the galley. The world was coming apart, one headline at a time. Senate hearings suspended after data corruption scandal. Multiple agencies deny involvement. Leaked files under forensic dispute. The truth she'd released was already being rewritten, twisted into noise. Some believed her, others didn't. It didn't matter anymore. The truth wasn't supposed to be neat. It was supposed to make people look twice. On the fourth night, the captain knocked on her door. A broad man with kind eyes, he spoke English with a thick accent. "We stop soon," he said. "Iceland. You leave there?" She nodded. "Thank you." He hesitated. "Someone called the ship. Said you have family waiting." Her pulse jumped. "What name?" He looked down as if searching for it. "Daly. Said to meet at the pier." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Frank Daly had been dead for months. She'd seen his body, the revolver, the note. It had to be bait. But something in her wanted to see it through, if only to face the ghost head on. "Tell him I'll be there," she said. The ship docked under gray morning light. The air smelled of salt and diesel. Hannah stepped onto the pier wearing the crew's spare jacket collar pulled high. The town beyond the port was quiet, narrow streets. Wet cobblestones, houses painted the color of fog. She waited near the end of the dock, scanning faces. Nothing. Only gulls circling overhead and the slow hum of engines cooling down. Then she saw him. A man standing by a rusted pickup, cigarette in hand, collar up against the wind. He looked older, thinner, but alive. Daly. Her first instinct was to draw her gun, but her hands stayed still. "You're supposed to be dead," she said when she reached him. He smiled faintly. "So are you." "Oh." They sat in the truck heater, rattling windows, fogging. Hannah stared at him, searching for seams in the illusion. "How?" He shrugged. "Old contacts. Deep enough pockets. The Bureau wanted me gone, so I let them think they'd won. And Briggs dead for real. Some debts you can't pay twice." He handed her a folder. Inside were satellite images, coded transmissions, strings of numbers. "They're rebuilding," he said. Project Echo never ended. They just shifted it offshore, new funding, new name. You exposed them, but they turned it into a blueprint. Now they're studying how people react to truth itself. How panic spreads, how belief collapses. She looked up sharply. "You're saying I became the experiment?" Daly nodded. "You're not running from them anymore. You're feeding them data." The words hit harder than any bullet. Every headline, every protest, every conspiracy online, all of it was part of a new map. The system was learning from her chaos, measuring the aftershock of honesty. "So what do we do?" she asked. He flicked his cigarette out the window. "We vanish. Let them choke on silence." She shook her head. "Silence is their weapon, not mine." Daly studied her for a long time. "You still believe you can fix it?" "I don't believe," she said quietly. "I persist." They drove inland through volcanic fields and rain that looked like smoke. The world outside felt prehistoric, jagged cliffs, steam rising from the earth. Hannah couldn't tell if they were running toward safety or just deeper into isolation. They stopped at a remote outpost, a cabin converted from a weather station, walls lined with old radio equipment. Inside, Daly powered up a terminal static filling the room. You remember Vega's encryption key, he asked. Every number. Good. Use it. She typed the sequence into the terminal. Lines of code flashed, resolving into a single file echo_root.log, the screen filled with timestamps reaching back 40 years, every operation, every directive, every name. And there at the bottom, the most recent entry. Phase 4. Reintegration test, subject price, Hannah, status, active observation, objective monitor, global information, cascade effects. Her heart dropped. They're still watching. Daly nodded grimly. Through satellites, phone cameras, maybe even the ship you came on. You're not a fugitive anymore. You're a metric. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Rain hammered the roof. Hannah stared at the flickering screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. If they're measuring belief, she said, then maybe we give them something they can't predict. Daly frowned, meaning noise, chaos, too many truths at once. She looked at the cables, the transmitters. We flood them. They worked through the night. Daly rewired the transmitters to bounce signals across multiple channels, pirate frequencies, maritime relays, shortwave bands. Hannah compiled the original files again, layering them with every variant, every forged report, every theory the internet had spun about Echo. True, mixed with false, until no one could tell the difference. At dawn, she flipped the main switch. The transmitters roared to life, antennas glowing against the gray horizon. Static filled the air, thousands of overlapping voices broadcasting across the world. Leaks within leaks, truths wrapped in lies. Daly watched her half in awe, half in fear. You just erased the line. That's the point, she said. If they feed on certainty, I'll starve them with confusion. Outside, the storm broke open wind, howling across the barren plain. The power flickered. Daly grabbed his coat. They'll trace this in minutes, I know. She stepped outside, rain hitting her face like needles. The air smelled of sulfur and freedom. For the first time, she felt something close to peace. Not safety, not victory, but equilibrium. The world would chase her ghost forever now, 1,000 versions of her living in every feed, every headline. No system could track what couldn't be believed. Daly joined her, watching the transmitters burn in the storm. What now, he asked. She smiled faintly. Now we let the world decide what's real. Lightning split the sky, striking one of the antennas. The blast threw them both to the ground. When the smoke cleared, the cabin was on fire, the screen inside flickering its last words, signal dispersed global. Daly coughed, pulling himself up. You think it worked? Hannah looked at the horizon where the clouds were breaking sunlight bleeding through like the first breath after drowning. It doesn't matter anymore. They'll never know which version to erase. They walked away from the burning station, their silhouettes swallowed by the mist. Behind them, the storm carried her voice, fragments of recordings, interviews, data scattering across frequencies no one would ever fully capture. Somewhere across the world, millions of devices flickered simultaneously, receiving a single corrupted message. One fingerprint ends a cold case that haunted generations. And beneath it, a new line appeared, unsigned, untraceable. The rain never stops. Hannah turned once more toward the horizon, the sea whispering below the cliffs, her reflection fading into the fog. The world would remember her as it wanted hero criminal ghost. She didn't care anymore. The truth was alive, and that was enough. Weeks passed before anyone realized the world had changed. The noise came first static on radio bands, interference in news broadcasts, unexplained drops in communication networks. Governments blamed hackers, journalists blamed algorithms, but no one could locate the source. Somewhere between signal and silence, fragments of Project Echo kept surfacing, blurred images, half sentences, voices layered over one another like ghosts talking in code. In a newsroom in Paris, a reporter heard a recording buried in static. They turned us into data. Don't let them turn the truth into fiction. In a cafe in Hanoi, a student downloaded a corrupted file named rainlog.txt. It contained only one line: the rain never stops. In Sao Paulo, a radio DJ found a channel that hummed endlessly, repeating two words in dozens of languages we remember. The leaks multiplied until no one could tell what was real and what was residue. The world adjusted, mistrusting everything, yet listening harder than ever. Truth had become contagious. Far from all that noise in a village carved into Icelandic cliffs, Hannah Price lived quietly among fishermen who didn't know her name. She rented a small cabin overlooking the sea and worked mending nets, her hands rough, her hair gone shorter every month. Some nights she sat by the window, watching storms roll in, lightning turning the ocean white, and wondered if each flash was another signal leaving her fingerprints across the world. The scar on her arm ached when it rained. She never turned on the radio anymore. She didn't need to. The hum of the wind carried enough memory. Sometimes she'd walk to the pier and find postcards left by travelers, no address, just phrases written on them. "You were right. We saw it too. Thank you." No one ever claimed them. They just appeared, and the tide carried them away. One evening, a boy from the harbor came running to her door, cheeks red from the cold. "There's a man asking for you," he said in broken English. Her heart stopped for half a second. "Describe him. Old. Said his name is Frank." She stepped outside into the wind. The sky was a bruised gray gulls circling. On the pier stood Frank Daly, older still, leaning on a cane, his coat whipping in the storm. She hadn't seen him since the night they burned the transmitters. She walked toward him, slowly, half afraid he'd vanish. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I needed to see if you made it." "I did. Barely." He smiled. "They're still chasing your shadow. Every week, another rumor. One says you're dead, another says you're running a pirate station from Greenland. People are starting to believe the myth more than the woman." "That's good," she said quietly. "Myth is harder to kill." He handed her a folded newspaper soaked at the edges. The headline read, "Congress abolishes behavioral initiative, new whistleblower protections passed." Beneath it, a photo of candlelight vigils across several cities, people holding signs with one symbol, a fingerprint inside a raindrop. "You did that," he said. "No," she replied. "We all did. I just started the echo." Daly looked out at the water. "They'll come looking again, Hannah. When the panic fades, they'll need someone to blame. I know. What will you do?" She looked at the horizon where the light broke through heavy clouds. "Keep moving. Keep listening. When the rain stops, I'll know it's over." He laughed softly. "It never will. Then neither will I." A horn sounded from the ship leaving the harbor. She walked with him down the pier, the wind tearing at their coats. "You could come with me," he said. "No. You still believe in systems. I believe in signals." They stood together for a long moment, the storm building around them. Then she turned, heading back toward the cliffs. When she looked over her shoulder, Daly was already gone. Only footprints in the rain remained. That night she packed her few belongings, a knife, a notebook, a weather radio, and the faded photograph of Emily Carter she had carried from the beginning. She slipped the photo between the pages of the notebook, wrote one final line beneath it. "The truth survives by movement." Before dawn, she left the cabin unlocked. The wind carried sea spray through the doorway as she walked down to the shore. A small trawler waited, its light cutting a pale circle on the waves. The captain nodded, but didn't speak. She climbed aboard the deck, slick with rain. As the boat pulled away, she watched the cliffs recede into fog. Somewhere above the clouds, a satellite still tracked her heartbeat, but she didn't care. Let them listen. Let them record. The rain fell harder, washing her reflection from the water until only the sea remained. Miles away, in a government data center buried under concrete, a monitor flickered awake. A technician yawned, noticing a single feed reactivating an old frequency thought to be dead. On the screen, audio crackled to life, the sound of waves, then a woman's voice whispering, "You can't own the truth. You can only hear it." The feed cut out, leaving static. The technician stared at it for a moment, then smiled without knowing why. Somewhere deep in the system, the file labeled Subject H. Price blinked once, then vanished. The cursor blinked on an empty line waiting. Out at sea, dawn broke. The rain slowed, turning to mist. Hannah stood on the deck, wind in her face, eyes on the endless horizon. The world behind her would keep rewriting, arguing, denying, but she was still moving, one heartbeat beyond reach, one echo ahead of every silence. And for the first time since Emily Carter vanished into the storm so many years ago, the air felt clean. The sky cleared, the ocean breathed, the rain at last began to fade.